the way they were in the 1600s. I just love that period of time, and so it's a unique place to live.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just curious, was that part of the Italian government's effort to revive certain areas of the country where you get a kind of a discount on those houses that need to have all the plumbing and everything installed, like
Yeah, no,
everything,
no, most of those places don't have no infrastructure from the city. I mean,
right?
these
Not even a
places are way
road.
out. There's no hospital, no nothing. I stumbled into this place 2009 looking to where my grandfather had come from. Ran across this town I thought might be it. When I walked in, there was a five-star restaurant in this little village of 188 people at the base of the Alps. And so we went in and asked if I was hoping to find maybe a foundation or something for my great grandfather's mill. And the guy goes, "No, it's right around the corner. If you want to see it, I'll have someone come and show you." If you can imagine that. And then next thing I know, this lady's standing at the table with pictures of my grandparents and said, "Please come to my house after lunch and have coffee." And so we go to her house. When I walk in, my mother's picture's on the wall with her brother and sister. And she puts her arms around me and says, "Welcome home. We've been waiting a long time for your return. This is the home your grandfather was born in. This was your great grandfather's house." And so immediately, on our return to the States, I was off to uh, college to learn Italian. And so I started looking for a home right away in this little village. And so it's my home 3, 4, 5, 6 months a year when I'm away from the States, when I want to get away from our culture and
Yeah,
experience a whole different culture.
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just fascinated by that. Yeah, I love that. I love that story. That's I guess when did your family come over here? I guess late 1800s during the kind of big
Uh,
immigration
yeah, my
boom.
grandfather come over. He was what I found out after being there a while. He was the last Satania. The brothers were all killed in and being drafted into World War I.
Mhm.
And the name was for the area because of the mill was a very prominent family. So they shipped him off to America, and he come over, I think, about 1915, 1913, something like that. And they wanted to preserve the name. They didn't want the last Satania to be killed in war like his cousins and everybody. So he came over, and he maybe should have stayed because he ends up out on the west near the in Colorado in a coal mine, and for 32 years, him and his mule were almost like indentured slaves in the coal mine. He he was only 5'4", and I don't think he could stand in the tunnel. And him and his mule would go in and blast the face, and he would shovel in a cart, and they'd pull it out. And many stories of the horn going off, cave in at the mine. He had many stories of methane gas catching on fire. And sooner you got your debt paid at the company store, they'd lay you off. And so the only way you could sustain your family and it would be to borrow money for groceries and stuff at the company store. So for 32 years, he was kept under the thumb.
Right.
And finally, his son married a woman with a little bit of money, and it was enough money for him to enter an apprenticeship just before World War II and to pay off the debt at the company store.
Right.
So at 50, my grandfather headed to the west coast of California. No money, two teenage daughters, a son going off to war, and and not speaking the language very well at all still.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, and we've all had our turn in the barrel, I think. I mean, I think almost all families, if you research your history.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
This is Andrew Whitstadt, and you are listening to Heavy Bored. And we're recording this on May 27th, 2025. My guest today is Gary Smith. Gary is an entrepreneur, a photographer, and an author. He's penned several novels and short story collections, as well as several books of his photography. And his latest book is titled More Than You Know, the latest installment in his series of thrillers following Warren Steelgrave. And I'm pleased to welcome him onto Heavy Board today, Gary Smith. Thank you so much for coming on Heavy Board.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. The one we always start with, and we were already talking about this a little bit, Gary. We like to ask authors that come on here, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? What did your parents do? How did these kind of formative years start to meld Gary?
Well, I was born on the west coast of United States in California, in a small, at the time, farming community, Hayward, California. Since then, it has. I think we had then a population of around 8,000, and now it's well, maybe close to 200,000. So the whole Bay Area has turned into a huge multiplex. And when I grew up, you left Hayward and you drove a small road to Saliandro and on the East Bay. Um, so it was, TV was two channels, three channels dominated by dad, and you were left to your own vices. So the only rule in our household was, especially during the summer, you had to be home before the street lights turned on. And so we were left to our own devices to make our own toys, slingshots, crossbows, other weapons, and to roam the hills with. And so I think that was a real advantage for anybody that ends up being a creative. Because you spent your day using your mind to create things, making things, experimenting with things. There was a wire fence that ran from my house down about, oh, I don't know, I think it was about 8 houses down to my friend's house. And we decided we would, if we separated the wire so that it was just two wires going down and with a battery and stuff, we could make we could make ourselves up uh, a sort of uh, thing to type with, and and we'd send signals up and down that it was, hey, where do if you got two taps on the on it, it was time to meet up at the school and go for a hike or something, and so we did things like that. So it was things kids don't do at all today. I'm amazed
Right.
with my own children. Dad, how do you change a tire? And it's like, what? The car won't start. Well, you know, simple things that was like second nature to us growing up. Yeah.
This was in the 50s mostly.
Yeah, I was born 48, so this would have been like 53,
Post-war boom. That makes you part
53,
of the
50. Yeah, I'm a baby boomer. 50,
baby boom. My parents are baby boomers, so they have a special place in my heart. Yeah, and
yeah, 50, 50. So 53, 54 on up. And my dad was a cement finisher, and my mom, as in those days, stay-at-home mom, didn't drive. Yeah, she didn't trust her eyes. Even when finally in the 60s, she got a driving license. She got a small accident and she never drove again. She had measles as a little girl, measles as a little girl, and it scarred her eyes. So she was didn't trust her eyesight. She was blind, I think, for 2 or 3 years, and finally they found a doctor that could peel the scars off the cornea. And I heard it was very painful. I'd heard stories growing up, and
Yeah.
so she got her eyesight back, but she never, well enough with glasses to get a driver's license,
Right.
but
Yeah.
she didn't really ever trust it. So we grew up like that, and then probably I was the first supposed to go to college.
How
New
many?
college.
How many? How many siblings did you?
Oh, I just had a brother,
Were you younger brother, older brother? Or?
older brother, and my mom Italian. Sundays were always at grandma's in Berkeley. It was always a long drive to Berkeley for
Right.
family dinner. So you grew up with a strong sense of family and the importance of family. So uh, in high school, I was taking all these college prep classes and planning to go to college when I went to work for my dad's brother, who was a cement contractor. And I just loved the construction, just loved it. So my sophomore year, I got out of all of my college prep classes, dropped them all, decided I wasn't going to college. I was going to get out of school as soon as possible and attack life. And so it was the first. Didn't get much guff from my parents. They understood that. They pretty much let us let me anyway grow up pretty much how I wanted, as long as I was staying out of trouble and had respect for them and uh, and their rules. It was like mom was to never worry about where you were or where you were going. But anyway, I dropped those classes, and it was my first major decision about my own life, and I've never regretted it. The Vietnam War was going on, so I immediately enlisted into the Naval Reserves and did my active duty that way. I did not want to go. We were being drafted right out of school.
Right.
You graduated, there was your graduation, and then you were off to boot camp someplace
Right.
to start killing people.
I
And, and so I kind of wanted to avoid that. I wanted to avoid that. And so, there's a downside to all that, but it was tough times in the country. And so after that, I started my working career as a laborer and loved it. So after a few years, I had a chance to get into a trade. So I became an electrical apprentice. A couple of years later, I figured I was at the top of my career. I was running large work for a company, uh, quit, and started my own electrical company with one employee. And over the first 10 years, built that into a multi-million dollar industrial electrical company working. I think we worked in about 34 different states, maybe 32 different states, and and built that. And then upon retiring, I well, first I found family in Italy and come home, retired, sold everything, and and went back to school to learn Italian. And it was in the Italian class that the advanced class that we had to write essays. And because I was in Italy all summer, it was we had to write essays on something out of a Italian newspaper. The first half of the essay had to be show that you understood what it was about. Couldn't be politics, couldn't be sports. Had to be something local. going on in some village someplace. And then the second half you could free write. And having been in Italy all summer, there was always something going on, a festival, something going on with my cousins or something. And so I would get the local paper, write an article on that festival, and then free write the rest. I found I loved it, just absolutely loved the free writing.
In
And
Italian, in
oh,
a
in Italian, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And but it was just using that creative part of yourself to put put yourself into that story. It's one thing to write about, the colors and the thing. It's another thing that to write about going to that festival with your cousin and eating the orange or whatever. And so I found that I just loved it, and that was the beginning of my writing career. So,
Yeah.
about 2015, I wrote my first small novel, just to see if I had a voice. And I was smart enough to know that I still had 2 semesters left of English classes I would have to take. I've avoided it all these years, but to get an AA degree in Italian, I would need to take these 2 classes. And I knew they would change whatever voice I might have, it would change your voice. I mean, every experience changes your voice. And me not having any English since my sophomore year in high school, would change it would change it a lot. So I cranked out that first book and put it out very naive, didn't know manuscripts had to be double spaced. Thought that the proofreader and somebody would do correct all the mistakes, stuff like that. Really embarrassed myself with the proofreader and editor. But people loved it. And, I got 4.8 stars on average. So I knew I had a voice. And then it was supposed to be a one-of book. But people wanted to know what happened to this couple. Okay. After this exciting adventure they had, risking their lives, what happened to them? Did they ever get back together? That kind of thing. So I was getting even. So I said, all right. So I continued it to the second book, the third book, the fourth book, the fifth book. And I'm just now halfway through the 10th book in the series. And so the last 4 have won international awards. And so I'm very pleased. I'm very
That's something I want to get to too. Like one of the questions we always ask is when did reading and writing come into your life? I mean, like, because so many people, some it's, oh, from childhood, I was always a big reader. Other people, it's like, oh, I came to it in college or later in life. And you said it was kind of like later. Were you a big reader growing up, or was it just something that was, taken away from the fun times, and then you got into it when you were more mature later in life? Like, how did it start? How did you start to, I mean, you said this stuff with the essay writing and stuff, but I mean, usually a curiosity blooms and you're kind of picking up books and authors and stuff like that. You're like, oh, I kind of like that. Maybe I'll try it. I mean, how did it start for you with that? I know you just gave us the
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. I'm dyslexic,
okay.
so I never thought of myself as a
Ooh,
reader.
interestingly, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
Being a baby boomer, were you
yeah.
diagnosed later in life
No,
with that?
no, and
Right,
then
right, right.
no,
So you just
no,
had no idea why school was
you
so
figured it
hard.
out for yourself. I just knew when my friend got held back in second grade, I wasn't being held back ever
Right,
again.
right. Yeah, yeah. They didn't
So
even know what it was. Yeah, yeah.
no, you just knew, no, 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 no. I had to get past these tests all the time. And you
Right.
had to work with, I don't know why everybody else is having such an easy time, but, but it was interesting. My brother was very intelligent, older brother, and a little different fellow. And him and his good friend would always go around to all these uh, what we'd call them now thrift shop. In them days they were called something else. I can't think of the name right here. And they'd buy these old books, leather bound books, and he loved collecting books. And he was reading Cyrano de Bergerac, I think was the first book. And the scene in there with the sword fight where the guy makes fun of his nose captured me. And so I took that book and I read it, and I was probably in the fifth grade. And so in the sixth grade, I read Canterbury Tales. I mean, because
Right.
that was the most, that was near pornography for a young kid in the fifth grade. And so I started that I was asked that question a couple of years back, and I started thinking back, when did I start reading? And it seems like from about the fourth or fifth grade, I was reading, Treasure
Right.
Island. I was reading all these classic kind of books,
On your own, like, or stuff that you were
Yeah,
assigned in
no, no,
school, or
no,
yeah,
just on my own. They weren't signed. It was summertime. There wasn't much to do, and I'd sit out in the
right.
backyard
Pre
and
in the pre-Silicon Valley kind of suburbs of San Francisco. Yeah, it's what else are you gonna do? It wasn't all built up like it is now with these Google headquarters and billions of dollars. Hold on, Gary, I lost you for a second there. Are you might have muted or can see you and all that, but I lost audio. Is that little microphone in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen? Is that have a red line through it or anything? Oh, it says you're muted now. Now it says you're unmuted. That little arrow next to that microphone, hit that. It might have switched your input. Where it gives you kind of a menu and it'll give you like a built-in microphone or something like that.
is that better?
That's it. I got you. Got you. Now you're back. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, no worries.
All right. So yeah, so so I kind of was always I always enjoyed reading and collecting books, and but I never thought of it like that because it was always
Right.
very being dyslexic. It was I could never read for very long. Some it's funny. Some days I could read 40 pages. Some days only five.
Right.
And so
That sounds like most people of my generation when they're reading now. I mean, that's just the average. They can barely read.
yeah.
But and going off of that, we always like to ask, what were some of the first writers that you remember being enamored with, or who are your go-to idols and inspirations, and kind of the writer side of things?
Yeah, well, Breakfast at Tiffany's was a great book.
Capote got mentioned on a recent episode too, and I
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, yeah.
And my favorite book was Shane, and I can't think of who the author was, but it was I think the author only wrote two books or something that was published, I think, in the early 50s. But I just loved that opening chapter where the boy's on the fence and he sees this guy coming up the road and he realizes this is a man like he's never seen before.
Right.
It's just, he's dressed in a way. And then later on, I really heavily influenced by Raymond Chandler.
Oh
Uh,
yes, he's a favorite
yeah,
of ours. Yeah, on the
yeah.
podcast.
No, before I start a book, I still read The Long Goodbye.
Long goodbye.
I'll read The Long Goodbye before, kind of gets me wanting to sit down and start a new book. So I always read that through because you've been busy editing and all this stuff for 2 months in your last book. You kind of, you know, your mind's kind of shambles there, but it kind of lines it all up and gets me ready to start writing again,
Yeah.
thinking about the way he wrote. Um, so there.
And then you have kind of like these. I want to get to you about like reoccurring characters and stuff like that. Was
Yes.
Clancy or any of these type of, even Ian Fleming and some of these guys that had these big kind of thriller
Yeah,
characters?
I never read a lot of Clancy. I mean, enjoyed the movies,
Right. Yeah.
but too big a book for dyslexic. you know, way too big a book.
Yeah.
To hold my attention for at as slow as I read at times. No, that'd be a year's reading. I got dyslexics are high energy. I'm probably ADD too because I can't sit there and go through a book that big. So, um, Yeah, not so much Clancy or Ian
The-
Fleming or any of them, you
were
know.
the pulps big, like kind of the Chandler and people in that vein? Was that like a big kind of, because I'm envious of the baby boomers able to
Uh-huh.
grow up in the time with the serials were still a thing, the science fiction serials, the adventure fiction serials, the basically, what Lucas and Spielberg based Indiana Jones off of, these kind of serials, where they would, you could subscribe, or you get them in the cereal box, you get them in, these kind of you just they don't exist anymore. They stopped existing at a certain point, like in the 70s, and then it's
Yeah.
just, so it's just a piece of literary history that like a few generations got to experience, the boomers and
I
previous
never,
generations. And
yeah, science fiction has never been a genre I've enjoyed. I can't. I've a couple friends that are science fiction writers, and they've asked me to maybe proofread a couple chapters and tell them what they think, and I'm nobody to want to criticize anybody creative's work. I'll tell you that, and but I'll give it my best shot, but it's hard for me to get through. I just
yeah, sci-fi is one of those weird genres where if you're into the more literary stuff, it depends how it's written. It depends how it's written. It depends how they set up the world. It's so much world building because it's like a different planet or something. I'm a big Kurt Vonnegut fan and
yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah.
And he was
I,
very,
my English
he
teacher
made it
was a big around. I had a hard time getting through Sirens of what was it? Sirens
Sirens
of
of Titan, or
the
yeah,
Titan.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Because
Uh,
he was one that I thought, yeah, one, he elevated the sci-fi genre, but he also kind of, like you said, made it a little bit more accessible. The world building wasn't so excessive, so you have all these weird names for weapons and stuff. He would
yeah,
make it like much easier to follow, and that's probably
absolutely.
why he became so popular as like a guy, where it's not this kind of obscure, weird laser weapon that has this strange name that you can't pronounce when you're reading. You don't even know how to say it in
You
the
can't
movie.
look it up.
Right, exactly, because it's fictional. And I want to get to that too, because you kind of, you're in the thriller genre and all of that. But yeah, that's we always like to know that. So before we get there, I do want to know. So you said how you got started as an electrician. What made you want to not go to college? Because like as you said, everything was set up for you to go to college, to go take these prep classes, go to
Yeah.
college, be the first member of your family to go in there and change the generations coming. And you said no. Was it the dyslexia? Was it that school was difficult? Was it just that it was boring? Was it just that you liked working? Yeah, yeah. What
Yeah.
is it? What made
Well,
you?
it was funny because being sent out, being given the chance to work for my uncle, it was very, very physical. I mean, in them days, we didn't use concrete pumps. I wheeled all the concrete, a wheelbarrow full of concrete up a ramp, over a set of stairs, a porch into a backyard is not an easy thing to do.
Two cubic feet at a time, right? Yeah.
And I loved it. All my
Right.
cousins went to work for him, and they'd last 2 or 3 days,
It's brutal work. Yeah, brutal
and
work to do
I
construction.
loved it. I loved
Yeah.
the physicalness of it.
So
Uh,
it's a young man's game. Yeah, it's a young man's. Yeah,
yeah, but I loved it. I just loved
right.
it, and
Well, being a young man,
and
getting
he
into
was not
this,
easy. He
yeah,
was not easy to work for. This guy, I mean,
especially when it's
mm,
family, right? Yeah.
it was like working for Clint Eastwood. He'd give you that stare and throw a hammer at your head, and you better duck. If you didn't have quick reflexes, you're going to the freaking hospital with an eye missing.
Hmm.
And but when you won his respect, and he taught you what it was to be an employee. I remember we were waiting for the concrete truck to get there, and he ran down to get something, and there was nothing to do. We were waiting for the truck to pull up, and so I was sitting there doing something, sitting down doing something, and all of a sudden this hammer went right past my head, and he says, "You never let the boss come and see you sitting on the job."
Right.
Yeah. And he says, there's always something to do. Check the lug nuts on the truck. It's like,
Yeah.
and it was lessons like that give me the career that I ended up having in construction, and being the foreman in a heartbeat, and because he because of those lessons that he had taught me
I
growing
want
up.
Briefly, I want to ask you about that too,
Mm.
because there's this theme on this podcast where I talk about it a lot, where I think about especially young men.
Mhm.
Young men, you got a lot of energy, you don't know what to focus on. Yeah, you're kind of drawn to certain things, whether it be writing, whether it be creative, whether it be physical activity like construction work, but you don't really know, you're lacking that discipline. You're lacking the kind of, I guess, well, this is a long way of saying me that I don't know. I've been obsessed with this idea of when you're a young man, you need an older man, an authoritative older man to kind of whip you into shape, to kind of be like, no, that's not how you do that. Like, no, that's not the behavior that's acceptable. Little correction. And usually it's a father or something like that, or an uncle. Yeah. Something that a family member or a neighbor or whatever. But I don't know. I just, like you said, you didn't know how to work. Like you didn't know that, like, I don't know, like when you're just sitting around and somebody's paying you, they get angry. Like, like when you're like, I remember I managed a restaurant in college. And so I was a little bit older than the people that were working under me. I was in my, early 20s, whatever. I'd been working there for a few years. Owner trusted me, all that kind of stuff. But then the teenagers that was working there and stuff, when there was nothing to do, my boss would get very angry and he'd be like, well, you could clean something, this needs to be cleaned, this needs to be cleaned, like this is a restaurant, like there's constantly stuff that needs to be done. We're not paying you to sit here and take a break. You have your breaks, but like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I've thrown it out there. What do you think about that? Get the especially somebody that grew up in the, because the baby boomer generation, you guys saw so much of the changes that have happened over the last 70 years in the country, from economic to political to whatever. I mean, boomers are responsible for ending the draft, like this kind of, I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that, being a young kid and then having like a stern older man throwing hammers at you because you're
Yeah,
misbehaving? I mean, what do you think of that? Like that.
well, we lost a lot of the culture in the 70s. It become unpopular to be a masculine man.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
We lost that model. Uh, you'd get fired if you give somebody a stern reprimand for sitting down, right?
Throw a hammer through the air.
You wouldn't even want to think of that, right? And so and so we lost that. I have 6 children. I have four boys. Two of them are, I have twin boys. They have an older brother, and then there's an older brother. They all had the tail end of that.
Right.
My son, when he was playing football in high school, I remember the freshman high school, his coach was a volunteer coach, and he was an old iron worker.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And I remember at a game, there's 2 seconds left. They're on the 2 yard line. He calls a timeout, and they're down by 1 point because they had missed a field goal. So you see him hitching up his pants as he's limping on out to the field. Crusty old guy. And he gets them all in the huddle. And then he comes walking back, and then they go over right tackle for 2 points and win the game. So afterward, I asked my son, I says, so what did he say to you guys? Well, he came out and says, we didn't come here to kiss our goddamn sister. We come to win or lose. Now put it over the tackle and walked back. you know,
Yeah.
Nothing new hands, right? It's like, we win or lose. We ain't accepting no tie.
Yeah.
And then the twins had a legend from our town who was kind of their coach. His son was the varsity basketball coach. But the coach, he was really the coach, but he'd never get in the kid's face. But if you were put on the team, if you made the team, and it doesn't matter you're on the bench, you are going to go in because you're going to rest those starters.
Right.
And that score is not going to change.
Right.
There was, I did my best. It was not acceptable.
Right.
And
Yeah.
even during the game, you'd put a kid in, and then you'd see him walk way down to the end of the court, away from the rest of the teams. When the other kid come out, and the coach would send him down down the line, and he looked like a dog with his tail between his legs because he knows what's going to happen when he gets down there. And so you know,
Yeah, I
and,
think about it all the time because
and
I
they got
mean,
and they got rid of they got a new director, a new sports director, and they got rid of those coaches. And I remember the first night it was the first night of practice. We dropped our twin boys off. So when they come home, I said, "So how was it?" He said, "This is the first basketball team we felt like we belonged to." And he says, "But it is in Kansas." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "The coach had us all lined up and he's talking to us. And these two kids start talking at the end of the line, right? This is just for tryouts."
right.
And he stops, he walks down to him and he says, "You two, get your effing ass out of the gym and never come back." And their other school coach would be fired for using that kind of language and getting
Right,
in the face, right?
right,
And he got a lot of heat because at 5 o'clock, uh, the gym was locked for practice. And if you missed the practice, you did not play, no matter
right,
how good a player you were.
right,
And some mothers were complaining, "Well, my son was only 5 minutes late and the gym was
right,
locked," and he was locked at
right.
the gym. Huh? And so
Yep,
there was a lot of opposition to that kind of discipline, you know.
right,
He told all the kids, he says, "Here's the deal. You have to have a 3.5 average to play. I expect you all to have 4.0.
right,
That we have lots of scouts come to watch you play. And if you think you're going to get a scholarship and you don't have grades, you think they're going to spend all that money on you, you got nothing coming." And then so he says, "You don't get to practice if you don't come in with your homework signed off." And the teachers wouldn't sign off. The new teachers wouldn't sign off the homework.
right.
So he put a study class in after school
Yes.
in the library. They made him stop it.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this is how bad it was beginning, you know.
And this was
And
in like the 70s,
and this would have been no, this would have been you know, in the 80s, you
80s.
know, right at the tail end of that stuff. It
Right.
was trying to think when they graduated. That was about 18 years ago. So,
I think you're 100. It's absolutely correct. You know, the reason I think about it too is I went to this all boys prep school for high
mm,
school and stuff. And it was Catholic in Baltimore where I grew up. And there was this older guy that he was the former football coach. He had stopped
mm,
coaching, but he'd been teaching, 50 years. He taught math. He was actually an excellent teacher. He's no longer with us. Augie Maselli. I always shout him out when I can because he was just a great man. I have such admiration for this man. He was the one type of guy that took no shit, from any of these teen boys walking around this school.
no,
We had to wear ties. If you backtalk this guy, he would grab you
mm,
by the tie, yank
yeah,
it, and pull it right into your face. But
no,
what'd you say to
absolutely.
me? And he was the coach. And he always had this legendary story around him. Whereas in the 80s, when he was coaching, and they were quite good, they were winning state titles and stuff like that. Day before Thanksgiving, party day, bunch of star players got drunk day before Thanksgiving, and we had this famous kind of turkey bowl match with our rival high school on Thanksgiving Day every year. It's been 100 years of doing this. They got caught, right, as teenage kids do, whatever.
Mm,
And he just said, he said, "Okay, well, you're not going to play in the big turkey bowl game against our rival school." And these were star players,
yeah, they
And
thought they
so,
could get away with
right.
it.
And after they did that, he said he had other players on the team came up to him in his office and said, "Coach, you got to let them play. We're going to lose this game if they don't play." And he said, "Oh, really? You think I should let them play? We're going to lose this game without them." And they said, "Yeah, coach, yeah." And he just said, "Okay, well, then you can sit out too." He just said, he's like, "I'd
Yeah,
rather lose with a bunch of guys that did the right thing than win with a bunch of guys that did the wrong thing." And it just stuck with me just so much. Like, that guy had such an impact on my life. And I know all the other teenage boys that were sitting in his
absolutely.
rooms, just instilling that. And like
And
you said, if you're grabbing people by the ties, you're grabbing kids, like, kind of this to discipline them. Like, there is this kind of sudden reluctance to do that. All of a sudden, it's like, no, this kid is 13. He needs an adult man to, like, literally grab him and be like, "You need to shut up. Like, you need to, or you're gonna have this consequence right here. Not playing. That's your consequence."
the one thing caveat to that I've noticed, and I pay attention a lot,
Yeah.
um, is these are all lessons that your dad cannot give you.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting.
If when the dad figure feels he's going to fill that role, it becomes abuse and rebellion
And you want to
and
rebel.
lack of
Yeah.
discipline
Right.
and all that.
Right.
Nothing good comes out of that. And I was fortunate, like I say, my dad was cut from that cloth. Okay, my dad would like to, I mean, as we got older, he'd say, "Let's go in here, kid. We're going here and have a beer." We'd go into a biker bar. My dad was a tough old guy, man,
Yeah.
but never with me. His uncle, my uncle,
Right.
his, you know what I mean? But it takes a coach. It takes somebody else because it's funny, as a child, you'll listen to somebody else,
Right.
but not your dad.
Right. It's a cosmic irony. Yeah. Yeah.
It just, because you need to break away from your dad to become a
Right.
man.
Right.
And
That's
and
interesting too.
and
Yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting thing that I've noticed over the years.
Become your own man, right? It's people say it all the time, and you hear like the stories, with a famous TV show that was recent, Succession, right? It's kind of about that, where the father is constantly disappointed that his sons aren't becoming their own men. They're kind of like too afraid of his towering figure like over them, like, and he's this very successful guy that built this company and they haven't built anything, and then they feel like you're, that obviously it's living in your father's shadow, as they say, right? That kind of thing. There is this instinct within men especially to branch out, so either through rebelling against that parental figure, or I don't know, some type. I mean, it's just so interesting that you brought that up, because I think that is and you mean a sense of adventure maybe within, like, you
Well,
same thing that
yeah,
drives that is what drove you to be.
a rite of passage.
Yeah.
you know, and and we weeded those men out of our society.
At
You
least
know,
out of positions of power, and
wow, yeah,
exactly, yeah.
the coach can't, it's coach can't be Clint Eastwood or John
Right.
Wayne,
The
and
foreman can't be throwing hammers at the
yeah, no,
yeah.
this is unacceptable, and so and I think it's had a detrimental result on men in our society. There's a lot of kids. I was in Rotary, and one of the guys come up to me, and we were kind of close. And his son and my son were in the same school, same age. And his kid went sideways,
Right.
and he says, "You're lucky because your son has Coach Reynolds. My son, my son didn't get into sports and didn't have a coach."
Right.
And that's I think, and that was a difference in those two boys' lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you know. So, you know,
The same thing with that. I mean, the same coach and then some of the other coaches there that are all gone now at my high school did
mm,
the same thing, where
yeah,
the kids that were struggling, if you were struggling in school, uh they would sit you down and they'd be like, you need to do this. They would, kind of level with you, 15-year-old boys, where they're just like, you need to do that. If you don't do this, you cannot play. Like, that's the rule of the school. It's the policy. It's the state policy. Like, you have to have at least a 3.0 or whatever to play on the basketball team. So the basketball coach would do the same thing. He'd be like, all right, first hour of practice is us sitting in the library, making sure every single one of you are doing your homework. And he would reach out to the other teachers and stuff and be like, this guy's really struggling with his math. Can you help him for the first hour after school here? Like, come sit with them and just kind of, I don't know. I mean, and we try to do that with these programs still, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different when you're enrolling in a program that's set up for that. Whereas this guy went out of his way to show you that he cared about you, even if he was being disciplined, disciplining you and being a little tough. You kind of still got that sense that he cared, that he wanted you to play because and he wanted
yeah.
you to do well in
Well,
school and be successful out of high school. And
discipline, yeah, strict discipline is love.
right.
You care enough for. I mean, it's hard to maintain a discipline to a group of boys, and it's only out of love that you do that because they ain't paying
Right.
you to get it done, and so It's yeah, things have changed, and not for the better. We need to get we need to get more back to that. I think that's what drew me into construction, was being around a bunch of men that were, that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
I was gonna
it's
ask,
one
yeah,
thing to
what
be very demanding, but not unreasonable in the demand. Okay.
right,
Yeah, I mean, to be to
right,
work on time, give it your 100%, you know,
right.
and that's not, oh, he's an asshole. No, 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 he's not demanding anything that's unreasonable,
Right.
right?
Yeah. That's where the abuse, that's the line between the abuse. Yeah. Like, are you demanding something that's reasonable, like showing up to work on time, or are you demanding something that's excessive? Like that's
Yeah.
literally the line of
Yeah.
like, people are like, oh, he's demanding the bare minimum of like, showing up to work on time. It's like, well, what do you expect here?
There comes the hammer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
What got you into photography? When did photography start? Did that start later in life as well, or?
No, that started very young. I in the 50s, if you opened up a bank account, they'd give you a toaster or something. And I had an uncle that opened up a pretty good sized bank account. They gave him a camera. And so he gave it to me. He didn't know what to do with it. And I've always worked. I had my first job when I was 8 years old, whether
It's,
it was
it's
mowing lawns or whatever. I've always had my hands on money, and so I could buy film. And I loved it. And so I was like any kid playing with it up to a period of time, and then you kind of put it away. And then with my first wife, she wanted a camera to photograph the kids. And so I bought her a single lens reflex camera, decent one, Pentax, and she never used it. So I started using it, and I started uh, enjoying it. And then I entered a few contests, started winning contests. And before I knew it, I'm in the desert walking around with a 4x5 Vortex view camera looking to get one photograph. And so at one point, I think I forget what magazine it was in the back. There was an application
from the
to
days of magazines, that
yeah,
don't exist anymore. They're all online, a
it was the
physical
back of a
magazine. Yeah.
photography magazine of some sorts. And
Niche magazines too, like a photography magazine or a stereo
yeah,
equipment magazine or yeah, they
yeah.
just don't exist anymore.
And there was an application to send your work in to the Friends of Photography for a shot at being chosen to work or go spend time with Ansel Adams. So I sent my portfolio off, and to my surprise, a couple of weeks later, I get a letter back from Ansel Adams uh, inviting me down to the first session of the workshops. Uh, Leave your family, if, you know, uh, because you're going to be sequestered on this private school
Which is
dorm.
it's an enticing invitation as a young man. Yeah, leave your family, leave your hometown, and come do this adventure. Like
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And so off I went, not knowing what to expect, and what a surprise. I mean, people to study with Ansel Adams, Ruth Bernhardt, Jay Dustard, Jerry Olson. These are all at the top. Brett Weston, Lucien Klug. These were all world top photographers that were doing the classes, and so I didn't know what to expect. And it's like not being with one hero, but being with all the top musicians that you've and songwriters that
All
you've
right.
admired as a musician.
The Knights of the
And,
Round Table. Yeah.
and so I get to my room, and there's two to a room, and I'm wondering who my roommate was going to be. And all of a sudden this guy comes in flustered in a hurry, and he introduced himself, and he says, I haven't missed dinner yet. And I said, no, it's not for about another 45 minutes. He says, "Can you follow me to the airport and I can drop off the rental car?" He says, I got stuck. I took the red eye out of New York last night. I had my opening at the Metropolitan Museum last night, and I left right afterwards. No, I'll meet you over at the airport, and it was in Carmel, right on the coast. And so I took him over to the airport, and all the way I'm thinking, holy shit, this guy, you know, his work's in the Metropolitan, and he's my roommate, and you know, yeah, and it was an experience I'll never forget. You weren't treated as a student.
Right.
You were accepted as a photographer of
Got a peer.
high,
Yeah.
high regard. You're there to pick up techniques from people. Mostly, it's the classes were around lessons in photography, like philosophy,
Right.
you know. And I remember Ruth Bernhard in her class. She said, "How many are going to be a landscape photographer, and you're going to go out and do a great work of the Grand Canyon?" Everybody, oh yeah. This is what she goes. Well, here's the deal. You get up, you pack the car, you're packing your car, your camera and all your film and everything, and you walk outside and there's a dead cat in the middle of the road. She says, "You're never going to photograph the Grand Canyon until you handle the dead cat." You know?
Yeah.
And so often we're running down a road towards our goal, right? Whatever it is, right? I'm going to get this job, and this distraction comes up, and you just put it aside because you don't want it to distract from. No, you got to deal with that.
Yeah.
You got to deal with that before you get back on the road to that.
There's something else that brings up because it's another theme on this podcast about mentorship, particularly in the arts. So you talked about being an
Oh, yeah.
apprentice and the electrician and all that. And
Yeah.
that's pretty straightforward. People are, okay, yeah, you have to do that. And most people are open to it. But I think recently, and I came out of the MFA side of things. I have my MFA in creative writing where like, you're applying for these types of things. It's basically like that kind of like your photography program, but it's, based around the university and you're enrolled as a student there and you get the degree at the end of it. But, you're hand selected by these people, active writers, poets, fiction writers in the industry, and they select you and you go there and they treat you like a peer and you learn technique and all of that. But I've also noticed recently that's hit or miss depending on where you go, what kind of fellowship, all of that. Like, and it seems that there is this kind of lack of mentorship, as if the older generation is not interested in mentoring the next generation that comes through. And I don't know if you've noticed that. I mean, again, that we're talking about this was years ago, going to this photography retreat, I guess, let's say. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think of that? Have you noticed that, or you seen something like that? Like
Yeah, I
trying to
think that
find.
comes to the changing of the culture again. It's all tied together with what's happened, how we treat masculine men. It goes back to more emphasis, I think, on school and education over a craft. You when you're an apprentice, right? And you're working under a journeyman. You're not just learning like a teacher in a classroom telling
Right.
you how to do something, right? You're watching his moves. He's there's a philosophy to his work and the way he does things
Right.
that you don't get in the classroom. And we got away from a lot of that, and
And one thing corrections, like there's a hesitancy, particularly in higher ed. So if you're going through the higher ed route with the MFA kind of mentorship that way, there is a resistance to being critical or issuing corrections of your work or your attempts at creative work, whereas, the best mentors I ever had were people that were very critical, of the work that you're doing. Like, actually, this
yeah,
isn't good enough.
yeah,
Actually, you made this mistake here. You see how it's inconsistent, like kind of fix this inconsistency. there's like and maybe it's the cultural thing too. And I've experienced in higher ed. I worked in higher ed for about a decade, and there is a lot of oversight where, if you tell somebody that their portfolio needs work, that you open yourself up to the kind of bureaucratic apparatus kind of breathing down your neck, being like, well, why did you tell this student that their work wasn't good enough? It made them feel ostracized, and that's a violation of this policy and this kind of
Yeah, yeah.
thing. So the writing is getting worse because we're not allowing the older generation to mentor the next generation of creatives in this way. We're kind of tying the hands. Maybe I'm saying not allowed, that's extreme, but they're kind of tying the hands.
I think allow was
Yeah.
a good word.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
allowing was a good word.
Where they're like, oh, you need to still do it, but we're going to tie your hands up so that you can't actually do it, in a productive way. And I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's just the culture stuff too.
Yeah, something because it has changed. One of my greatest memories of the workshop, they had a small chapel at this school, and in there it was very quiet, and they had this huge table laid out with cheeses and wines, and where you could go get a glass of wine, and all the instructors, Ansel Adams, Ruth Bernhardt, all of them had to have their work up on the wall for you to judge their work.
Right.
And and I'm sitting there. Look, Ruth Bernhardt was one of my favorite photographers, and I'm looking at my favorite photograph that she'd ever taken is on the wall, and I'm standing with a glass of wine, looking at that, just admiring it. And all of a sudden, I hear this voice behind me, and he's saying, "It's amazing how she uses light, isn't it?" I turn around and it's Ansel Adams, and he's saying, "Is isn't it amazing? I can't understand how she does that. I've tried and I can't get it done." And you got this one-on-one, you know, with
Yeah.
with the master,
And they're just talking to you like
and
you're,
they're talking to you,
yeah.
and he's sharing his deficiencies,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
in the same way. And yeah, we don't get too many of those experiences anymore. And so it's one of, my work was ended up in private galleries and other galleries, uh, civil buildings until I gave it all up. I kept changing things until I got to the writing, but it's the one advantage I think I have over many of the other writers is all my book covers are my photographs. And throughout the books, I had photographs. I mean, I got 4,000 photographs on my phone.
Right.
So if I'm talking about walking out of the Galleria in Milan and seeing the Duomo and being stunned, I can add a stunning photograph of the Duomo in there,
Right.
or the ceiling of the Galleria for people that are into the story and can kind of see what has amazed this young woman as she's walked into the Galleria and seen the ceiling and stuff like that. So I put about seven, maybe 6 or 7 photographs throughout the book to emphasize what's happening in the scene.
Yeah, and that brings me to the next question is, like, so why write fiction? You had this successful career as an entrepreneur, a
Mhm.
businessman. You had a successful kind of outlet for your arts and photography. What made you get into fiction? I always joke with people, especially people that had a kind of
Mhm.
business beforehand. It's fiction writing is kind of the worst business out there. Why get into this business of writing fiction?
Well, at my age, it's purely for my own enjoyment. My
Yeah,
photography through the years was always the same way. And it's fiction, but most people think it's autobiographical. I
that's big right now. That's big right now. The
yeah, I
auto
mean,
fiction kind of, yeah,
well,
Ben Lerner and yeah.
my daughter comes to Italy, and they're always in the village saying, who's this character? Who is this person?
Right.
They all want to know which person that they know is in the book or whatever, because Hemingway said you can only write a good story if you've experienced it.
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate of starting as a laborer, ending up with a multi-million-dollar company that I started from scratch. um, all the court cases. I had like 60,000 hours over 40 years of writing cross-examination questions,
Right.
suing people like General Electric and people to get the $400,000 they owed me, kind
Right.
of
Yeah.
thing. So I had this deep well of characters and mannerisms and situations to draw from. So
A whole
uh,
lifetime's worth. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so and I write in first person. A lot of after my first book, it was suggested I write in third person. I guess to sell more books. I, yeah, I understand it.
Right.
You're writing a scene. James walks into the dark room, sneaks up behind her, and strangles her. Okay.
Yeah.
I walk into a dark room,
Right.
walk
Yeah.
up behind her and strangle her. So yeah, especially if it's a good character they identify with, you know what I mean? It
Right.
gets a lot of the scenes and a lot of the stuff can get a little too personal, you know.
And the third
You know,
person kind of creates a passivity, what they call passive voice, and obviously
yeah,
the industry likes third person because it's the easiest way to go about telling a complex story like in a novel, because when you're doing third person, the third person omniscient narrator, they call it, right?
yeah,
Where the narrator knows everything. So you can be in and out of multiple characters' heads. But if you're doing first person, you have to signify the switch if you're going into somebody else's, another character's head.
yeah.
A best probably famous example, Virginia Woolf would do this through paragraph breaks in her kind of stream of consciousness stuff. But you see other writers do it with like a little dash or a line, or maybe even just a chapter break or something. Each chapter is a different character, kind of, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings style. But yeah,
Unless
that,
unless you're reading Faulkner.
well, and Faulkner's just, are you a Faulkner fan? I
Oh,
always,
I read Faulkner and it was great because being dyslexic, he's given me all the permission in the world to not worry about grammar.
right. Yeah. Well,
When you
he is,
and
I
you
always
write
say,
a sentence, a whole chapter that's one sentence,
yeah, yeah,
with
that's,
1,200 words or something
he
sentence.
was, he might be the best American fiction writer ever lived.
Yeah,
Yeah, he might be. Uh every time I read something by Faulkner, I am blown away by this guy,
yeah.
how good he was. And yeah, then you get into kind of the technique when you start, not even just the story part, which is great, but the technique
Yeah,
where he'll have a
some chapters are
parenthetical,
paragraphs,
yeah,
some are 2 pages with three perspective changes throughout.
where it's he, what was it, As I Lay Dying, where there's a
Yeah,
chapter where there's a sentence, then there's, in the middle of the sentence there's a parenthetical, and the parenthetical goes on for 2 pages, and then the
yeah,
parenthetical closes and the sentence picks up right where it left off 2 pages ago. And so you have to kind of go back and be like,
yeah,
like that's just what he would do. It was this incredible craft. Yeah, Faulkner is a master for sure. Yeah, that
yeah.
is,
So yeah, he wasn't too worrying about changing perspective and with a paragraph break. Or I tend to
yeah,
use 3 stars when I change perspective to another
right,
character.
like a
Something
technique. Yeah, like a technique like that. Yeah.
to kind of for them to
And
they
what is it about
realize.
the first person? I think, would you say it adds like an immediacy to, like, it kind of amps up the tension, and kind of when it's first person, like you just explained in that example, it kind of elevates it a little bit to, especially when you're writing thrillers, the first person lends to the kind of thrill element more than the third person does. Of course, that depends how you approach it and all that, but you said you tend to find the first person to be more exciting, like more thrilling when
More
you're
personal,
more personal. Yeah.
and I hear from my readers uh that they'll identify with a character.
Right, with the eye
Where
and
and so I think that or what the character's going through. It's because it's so personal for the character. He's breaking up with a woman, the love of his life or whatever. I mean, who hasn't had that experience?
right. Yeah.
And so they they can identify with what's going on in the story. So it's just easier for me to write in the first person.
And I wanted to ask you, going into this, kind of as we get to the craft questions, recurring characters, how do you use them as an author, and what would you say are the risks and rewards of using recurring characters in your fiction?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of like everything, it's kind of a mixed blessing, isn't it? Like,
Right. Yeah, there's pros and cons. Yeah.
yeah, if how do you in the third or fourth or the fifth book, how do you reintroduce him in the story that doesn't
Without rewriting the previous 5 stories. Yeah.
yeah, without your old readers being put off by it, or the new reader not knowing who they are. And so there's that. I mean,
They call it retconning usually. Like
yeah,
the kids now, right? Where like and they were doing this with the kind of endless sequels that they're doing, especially in Hollywood right now, with the kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
where they'll put out a movie of a sequel of it, like, and they'll one little detail changes the entire sequence of a movie that came out 30 years ago. You're changing the story now. And that's, I would always argue, a weakness in the writing if you have to change that kind of stuff. And that's one of the challenges of using recurring characters,
oh,
obviously. But then,
absolutely.
yeah,
And
like,
and Raymond Chandler said it best, I think, for
yeah,
me. When when you're in your head, you're not being very creative at all. Okay, so as the series progressed, I find myself the first 3 chapters, you're in your head a lot because
if you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
you're trying to find that balance to bring the new writer into the story and introduce them to some of these characters, and yet not bore the old
Right,
reader. Well, I know all this. I read this. This is same in the last 4 books.
right. Don't repeat yourself, but
And
yeah,
so you're in your head, and you're not. I find that I'm not being very creative at all. I'm being very analytical, and then somewhere around the third chapter, it all kind of settles down, and then it really just takes off,
right.
and the characters take off on their own, and then some of the characters you can introduce as a situation comes up. In the book I'm writing right now, a reoccurring character that everybody loves, and I know they're all looking for. Old readers are wondering when Jack's going to turn up in this story, right? Because they love Jack. And a little bit about the fourth chapter. They have to stop by there to hide out his house. But just now, the other night's reading or writing, my main character comes home, and Jack's sitting there. And I know a lot of my readers are going, finally, shit's going to happen now. you know, and they're anticipating, with what's coming next, and so and a lot of that comes from just being observant in movies and other books that you read, I mean, yeah, especially movies.
Yeah.
Visually, when Clint Eastwood or John Wayne or somebody walked in that scene, you go, oh, it's about to happen now. Right?
And
There's
eh,
no
yeah.
dialogue. It's just, okay, this is what we've been waiting for.
And Eastwood, especially the ones that when he was in his prime there, like there was always a great line right before he pulled that trigger. There was always a line that
Yeah,
was just like,
yeah,
oh my.
yeah.
One I always bring up is that line in Unforgiven. And of course, this is later Eastwood in the 90s there. But yeah, when he's about to kill Gene Hackman and Hackman's on the floor and he's like, I don't deserve this. He's like, deserve ain't got nothing to do with it. And then he just blows him away, like no
Yeah,
hesitation. And like it just, what? But I think in the literary side of things too, especially, I came out of academia with literature and stuff like that. and it's in shambles right now. That's my personal take on being on the inside of it in terms of studying literature at that in that way. um it's always kind of, there's this denial of the effect of film on literature, whereas in the 20th century there was this new medium of story that came out, and it really changed the game forever. How people write novels, how we treat novels, how we visualize novels changed forever because of this new artistic medium in the 20th century, filmmaking, and the kind of movie, being formed. I guess by the 40s, it was kind of, the formula was figured out, 90 minutes, 2 hour runtime, a little bit more special effects than you get at a play, and all, all of that kind of stuff, where the playwriting affects it. And then, yeah, I mean, I guess novel writing came out of playwriting and poetry, and then all of a sudden movies just put a different thing. You could argue that movies came out of novel writing even. I don't know, but yeah, I just, that's an interesting thing too, how movies affect, especially the 20th century. Every writer that came out after movies were a thing, well, that affects the novels and how we write them, how readers read them, how they visualize them, especially in terms of movies. When you think of like the big breakthrough ones, like, my father, again, baby boomer, so always tells me stories about Star Wars coming out and stuff when he was, late teens, really his 20s at that point. And he's just saying that nobody had seen that before. Like, nobody had ever seen anything like it. Like, he just lasers flying through the air, like, kind of like, it was just so mind blowing. And now all of a sudden, everybody can visualize a laser flying through the air. So if you write that in your fiction, people are visualizing Star Wars, or they're visualizing, James Bond with that gun, or something, like they know how a gun looks when it's fired on screen, so they can visualize it now. Whereas before, if you'd never seen a gun fired, you just were guessing, or, imagining. It can be fairly accurate, but not, I don't know. Yeah. I'm going off.
Well, it's funny you should mention language and how it changes through the generations.
Right.
In my first book, I could use the word a sap. He took out his sap and hit him behind the left ear.
Right.
By my fourth book, you would have to look it up.
Right.
It'd be hard to find a definition. In this last book, you can't find it anywhere. You can't look up sap anywhere. And so, there's words that you grew up with using, come out of detective movies, detective novels, or whatever. That,
right.
Sunday bar. Nobody knows what a Sunday bar is, and you can't. You can find a definition to what's called a fist drap, which doesn't make no sense to me.
Are you a James Ellroy fan at all, with his crime novels? And he writes these doorstop, crime novels that are 800 pages, and they're so detailed.
That's why I don't know him.
Yeah, and they're all based usually in the 30s, 40s, 50s LA. So he's very good at that. Like, he'll bring in something like, I'm thinking of the novel where he talks about zoot sticks, and everyone's like, what's a zoot stick? But he kind of explains it in the novel so that you kind of can visualize what it is. And and then, because he's, this is a time period that, like, nobody lives in anymore, so he kind of explain these little things that mattered in the 40s when the detective was, or the 30s when the detective was trying to figure out what happened.
That's the problem I'm having, because my main character in the series is in his 70s now,
right?
And so I'm having to explain, what taking a roll of quarters and put it in your fist and wrapping your hand with a napkin is,
Yeah.
Bust somebody's jaw.
How's that too? How's writing it as a reoccurring character, but a character that's been aging throughout the novel?
Yeah.
So how is it? I'm thinking of things like, there was that show recently on FX. It wasn't very good, with called Old Man. And it was about this kind of, retired spy that was in his 60s, 70s now, but then gets drawn into something. But he's in his 60s, 70s now. So, he can't take body shots like he used to. He can't do this like he used to. He has to be a little bit smarter about how he goes about this, because his body, he's going to break his hip or something, if he falls out of a plane.
It adds to the story. If you're at that age,
And if it's a
And you're
series where
and
you've seen the character age, yeah.
and you're experiencing your own age going down the
Right,
stairs,
yeah,
and how nature's playing a trick on you if you've been very active your whole life, and so yeah, and in the last book, More Than You Know, I mean, everybody, proofreaders thought when they got to the last chapter, they thought, oh, he's killing off the character, because the character is getting older and
right,
it's bothering him a lot.
right,
And so he's dealing with that. He gets stabbed and loses his spleen, and he's wondering in the hospital if he's going to be able to recover
right,
from that. And he's just acknowledging how age has caught up with him, and how much longer does he personally want to live?
right,
How does he
exactly.
want to go out, Yeah. And so there's a
You,
scene in there when his good friend Jack is there visiting him and gets it. He goes, reminds me of Doc Holliday, because Doc Holliday, greatest gunfighter in the West, because he wanted to die. He wanted someone to shoot him in a gunfight because he was dying of tuberculosis. He didn't want to
right.
die that way. Haven't seen his mother die that way. So, and,
And I
and
know,
so he's dealing with that internally in the book,
right. And I
because I
know,
am at my age, I am
right,
in
yeah.
life.
And it finds
Yeah.
its way into the fiction. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
which is
Well,
interesting because we do this. I do this kind of, it's a running series where I'm reading all the James Bond books with a friend, and we talk about the movies, and there's 14 of the original novels at least. And Fleming goes into that a little bit. When you start getting to the third, fourth, fifth book, he starts, they're not the deepest books. It's about the action and adventure more so than the kind of deep inner turmoil of Bond, but there is some of that, and as there's the last couple when he's getting beat up and the stuff, and he's kind of like, what am I doing here, when he's laying in a hospital bed, I'm about to be 40. Why am I still doing this? Like, and for the British government, I don't know. I mean, that's real. That's character depth. That's the humanity in the character. Whereas, like, yeah, if you were somebody who was doing it in a very extreme profession, like being a spy or something, where there's a lot of risk, turmoil, anxiety, and all of that paranoia, you get tired of it. And then, yeah, can you even perform it once you get up there in the 60s and 70s?
yeah.
What's required?
And
Yeah,
yeah, and so for my character to get out of some of these situations, you know, he has to rely more and more on his experience and his age,
right,
his experience, right? And he's not going to this guy, and stuff,
right,
He's going to grab him, put him against the wall, and bust his jaw with with his fist wrap, with his Sunday bar. You know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or he's going to knows he can't outrun this guy, so he finds a place where when the guy comes by, he can take a pipe and take out the guy's knee, and
right,
so he can catch me now.
right.
But that element, as he's getting older in each of these books, there's less of this that can
Right.
action. He as an action character that can
He can't be a Jack Reacher, kind of a tough guy that always wins the fight. Yeah,
not
you
no
gotta,
more.
right, exactly. Yeah, you have to kind of change with the aging, and yeah, that's interesting too. With you see that with Cormac McCarthy's stuff too. As he got older, his characters got older, and the themes, No Country for Old Men and stuff, started to change.
Mhm.
Like, they started to become more about this kind of older guy who feels like the world left him behind, all of the kind of, but yeah, that's very important. I love that. It's what makes it realistic. It makes it realistic, because otherwise, if you're a reader and you're reading the 70-year-old guy who's whooping this 25-year-old's ass, you're kind of like, wait a minute, like, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
he
So
had to be a little
my
sneaky.
proofreaders and stuff are getting kind of worried, thinking this is going to be the last book, and I'm telling them, how old do you think this guy's going to be and these be good stories? And they go,
Right, yeah,
well, just quit talking about the age and people will forget how old he is. I
that's
said, no.
true. Yeah,
I'm saying, no, that ain't going to happen. I said, no, that's not going to happen. So the one I'm writing now, I'm thinking is probably going to be the last of it.
yeah.
So
I wanted to ask you about location, and what do you find inspiring about locations? And I'm thinking of things like James Bond, kind of sort of the first books to be this kind of international spy thriller style stories, where and then you get to kind of the Jason Bourne era, the Jack Ryan era, where the spy is bouncing across all these international cities. Like they're going to Paris, or they're going to Prague, or they're going to LA or New York, or within a matter of 48 hours or something, because they're chasing somebody. How do you use location, and how do you get inspiration from it? Or
Well, being able to live in Italy 6 months a year is I find very beneficial. One,
right,
I can use all those locations because you're so close to Paris and stuff, and you end up spending time traveling to those places. And so there's photographs I can take with my phone that I can add to the book or put into the book or whatever to make it more visual for the reader to visualize Florence and the Uffizio or whatever, and I think it's important. I think especially for American readers to be able to not only escape in the story, but to be able to escape uh, to Florence.
right,
And he's hiding out in Florence. And I've had criticism of that, and I've had people write me and say, "Oh, that could have been my vacation. I know all those streets and everything in Florence." And then I had people say, "God, how boring. It was like you were in a travel magazine, you know."
right, yeah,
So it's like everything else, right? It's everything's good or bad, right? It depends on the person. But I hear from more people that they appreciate that and they didn't know this part of history was real, or and they wondered about the architecture, and here he is running down this alley in Florence, and here's a photograph of that alley,
right.
and stuff like that they seem to appreciate it. And I think it is important. I think if you haven't experienced it all, it's hard to write in total fiction that and describe what's happening in that scene. You know,
Yeah.
it it helps if he's running down the street and turning down an alley that you know where that alley is, that you've been there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the last couple of questions here, Gary, are all kind of craft focused. We like to ask writers all the kind of
Hmm.
they get asked this because our audience likes to know. But I wanted to ask about your publishing journey and kind of so why did you decide to publish the way you did? Uh,
Well, most writers, I think, will tell you this, at least the ones that I know do, that once you turn it, if you give control of your book to a publisher, if you don't self-publish and you're giving it to them, they have a whole different motive than you. They want to make money off it, and they're going to change
right.
it how they feel it needs to be changed to make money off it. I don't write for that reason,
And they're putting money into it. So yeah, obviously they're buying the rights. So they technically
Yeah.
own the rights. You're selling the
Yeah.
book. Yeah, the story. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to keep him as pure to what I wanted to write. Um, there's always an underlying theme throughout the whole story. Hopefully, it's a very good mystery, a lot of suspense. But at the same time, they're human beings going through turmoils and challenges in their own life that are personal. Love affairs breaking up, a good friend being murdered, or whatever. And so that gives me that control over it. I've had a couple, one or two that I thought I was contacted about that might turn into a movie deal.
Right.
And and the wife says, "You don't seem very excited about that." I said, "Well, okay, let me explain it to you how that would work. They gave me $250,000 for the rights." I
Right.
said, "That's $250,000 for 10 years worth of work. and there's
Right.
no paycheck coming next week.
Right. Yeah. One-time payment. Yeah.
Right?
Sounds like a
And,
lot of money, but then you got to pay taxes and you're
well,
living
not
in
only that, that's only
California.
25,000 a year
Yeah.
before taxes. I said, and then they take it and it goes off and it wins 5 Academy Awards. I says, that's the screenwriter's work. That's the
Unless you have a good
director's
agent.
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the guy who picked the character's work, right? I says, none of that's my work. I says, but when I walk across that stage in New York and they give me that award for my book, that's all my work. That's my work.
Right.
For me, that's very, very satisfying. And I says, movie deal. There's no money in it, no big deal. You're giving your child to the guy down the street to make money off it, and it feels that way sometimes. So I guess it's a long way of saying I have a hard time crossing over the line to the money changers, I call them. They have a
Right.
whole different agenda. They have a whole different industry they're going to make money off of. And
And currently the industry is failing currently too. Yeah. Like it's losing money. Like
it's
yeah.
going to look, yeah, it's, there's big changes coming. I just seen an app the other day that you can I don't know how much the app was. It wasn't very much, but you can go in the library and take a book and put it on its back and take a picture of it, right, of the back, and instantly you can have your phone read you that book.
Right.
So what is that going to do to audio books?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that going to do to ebooks? Yeah, and
Yeah.
it won't take the money changers long to say, well, we can just have AI write that whole book and everything. We don't even have to have the authors. We can put 3 people in the thing and we can do our whole library of
Right.
ebooks without the authors.
And even ebooks, I've seen a lot of their sales have been plateauing. They spiked when it first came out, but over the last decade, they've been, obviously people transitioned to that, but then it's kind of leveled off. So there's not going to be much more growth in the ebook sector. And then the physical books. And there's this guy I like, he's kind of markets himself as this kind of marketing guru guy. He's a British guy named Rory Sutherland. And he says, people, what we didn't realize when we were transitioning to ebooks and Kindles and stuff was that people use books for other things than just reading. He's like, they're usually gifts at Christmas time, where he said sales spike 60-70% at Christmas time for books, where like people are giving them for gifts. He's like, you decorate your home with them, like they're on display, despite some of these nice hardcovers or leather bound books.
Yeah.
Like he's like, there's so much different than just a little tablet or something. He said there's a reason it hasn't entirely replaced books, and they were kind of unforeseen reasons by the people that were inventing this technology and stuff, which is always how it goes. But it's just interesting. This is a podcast where we like that kind of stuff, where we like to think about where's the future of publishing, where's it
Absolutely.
going, yeah, how and even stuff like this. So you can write 15, 10, 100 novels if you want, put them out all in yourself on Kindle. And if you're doing the work, you're paying for the ads, maybe you're even paying for some publicists and stuff. It's like you can be put up though there on the bookshelf with everybody else, by doing it yourself now. Like
Absolutely.
that's new. That's a different thing in the last like 10, 15 years that has changed the game once again. And like it feels like you're saying we're on the verge of something else changing too. Like
Yeah, no,
whereas
it's going to be
yeah.
going to change a lot. In my living room, I see in your background all your books.
Yes.
My bookcase is about that size,
Right.
but they're all hardcover first editions, most of them signed.
Right.
And I have a Rudyard Kipling book on the shelf, and a signed book by Winston Churchill. Uh, you're not going to get that in Kindle,
Are you a collector in that, like first editions?
Yeah, I started collecting them about 10, 15 years ago, and I've been really fortunate.
Nobody wants them anymore. Yeah, like you can just
Yeah,
nobody
they're
wants them.
cheap and nobody
Yeah.
wants them. I have one that I treasure.
They used to be worth hundreds of thousands. They used to be
Yeah,
worth so
no
much
more.
money. Yeah.
And it was John Brown, right? it's his book. His friend wrote the biography and went and visited him just before they hung him and
Right.
had him sign it. And I have that book.
Hmm.
And he signed it right into his page thing in the page. I mean, I treasure that book.
Right.
I treasure that book. And nobody even knows who John Brown is or why that's important, And so I'll give you this. When it came, my twins were about 12, and I'm unwrapping it, and I'm all excited about this book. And they go, "What's this?" I said, "This is a one of a kind book. There's not another one in the world." They go, "Oh, what's that worth?" I said, "Oh, what's it worth?" They go, "What's it worth?" I said, "I bet this book I could get $200 for it." And they went, "What?" And I looked at him. I says, "How much money does Bill Gates have?"
Yeah.
And they go, "Millions and millions and millions." I said, "Is there anything you think that he can't buy?" And they were like 12. And they go, "No, he can get anything he wants." I says, "He can't buy this book because I have it."
Right. And it's not for sale. Yeah.
Huh?
Right.
I says, "So I guess that makes me one up on him, huh?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this great in Vegas actually where I live. There's a branch. They're based in New York, but there's a rare books company
Yeah,
that has a
at the
location.
mile, at the one at the
Yeah,
Mile Mall.
the
Yeah,
Venetian, or I think it's, yeah, the Venetian shops, or what are they called?
there
So,
there was there was one at the Miracle Mile or something like that,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right next to the Planet Hollywood.
And they
Been in there,
have this like
been in there a few times.
they have a display case, and like, yeah, like these first editions. They have the first Casino Royale, Ian Fleming, first edition, 1952 or what. Like it just kind of right there in the glass case, and you can kind of
Yeah,
go in there and look at these things, and you're like, wow, like it's a historical artifact. So I like that you collect that too. That's it's another dying art. There's a few documentaries, listeners out there, on like Amazon and stuff. You can get them on Prime and stuff. Where they talk about the rare book industry, and they have kind of figureheads, and Fran Lebowitz makes appearance and things like that, New York writers and thinkers and stuff. And yeah, it's kind of insane that this kind of the industry is crumbling. And even they said it's getting harder to find the rare books because people just don't give a shit, like they're just not caring enough. So if somebody dies, nobody's even going through the books before they donate them to Goodwill or something, like it's just kind of this thing. So a lot of these people, they say they go to estate sales, these kind of
yeah.
brokers, and they're rummaging through these bookcases, kind of looking to see if anybody happened to have. I think I have one signed first edition by Joy Williams here, but yeah, I got that by chance. I wasn't seeking it out. It was because nobody cared enough. It was priced like a normal book. It was just, yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's crazy how there's
Yeah.
another one of
I've
those
got a
things.
sign. I got a Sirens of
Titan.
uh, yeah, I've got that signed by
Yeah,
Kirk.
I have a God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater signed edition. My father got me when I graduated
Yeah.
college. Yeah, it's a treasured possession. It's nice
No,
leather
and that's
bound
the
as
thing
well.
about
Yeah.
there's something about holding a book and reading a book that I've had a lot of people tell me. Yeah, I will not publish any of my books. None of my books get published in soft cover.
Okay.
They're all hardcover, And I put a year into this thing. I'm not gonna,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
do it soft cover. It's just my personal thing. Nothing against. I know they're cheaper to publish, they're cheaper to ship, but
Right.
no.
It's a better quality book. Yeah.
Yeah, I just enjoy holding a book.
Yeah, of course. What is your writing routine like? We like to ask that. How do you like to approach it?
I it depends on where I'm at. Like Shelby Foote. I write about like Shelby Foote wrote, where I have to write every day. If I'm writing a book, I write every day. And it's funny, the first day only 250 words. A couple of
Right.
days later, I'm writing 400 words. A couple of days later, I'm up to 700 words. And the story's taken off, and then it's 800 words a day. And then all of a sudden, somebody's birthday comes along, or the
Right.
wife wants to go away for the weekend. And when I come back and pick up the story, it starts at about 200 words again. I can't get past
Right.
200 words again. It's strange how that works for me. So I try to write every day, something, anything. I don't try to overthink it. I just sit down and write. The next day I read it. If I don't like it, I throw it away and
Right.
rewrite it. But I have to write every day.
Are you usually in the morning, afternoons, evening? How do you like to
Lately, it's been after 7 o'clock, but in the evenings because
okay, yeah.
I'm home here, grandkids, 6 kids, 7 grandkids. It's just okay.
Right.
Now, when I get to Italy, and then I'll generally write uh, every morning after coming home from the gym. I'll go in and sit and write for a couple hours till lunch, and then in the evenings also, before going to bed.
Yeah.
So I'll write twice a day.
Okay.
But yeah, but I have to write every day. Yeah, and there I always want to sit in the same chair,
Right.
at the same desk. Uh,
Rituals, yes.
so put on some jazz low in the
Jazz.
background.
Okay.
Yeah, put on some,
And you
you
like to
know,
do the music and all in the
a
background?
little jazz in the background. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
No lyrics or anything to distract, just a little.
Just
Yeah.
jazz. Davis kind of blue is perfect.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah. And do you when you write, do you do it right on the computer? Do you do handwriting notes? How do you like
I write on the computer
right
now.
on the computer? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Again, we like these details on this podcast. Everybody's
yeah,
got their own kind of
yeah. I know.
spin on it. Yeah. Yeah.
I think routines important.
Yeah.
I read a book called Wordsmith by the writer who's God, his name escapes me now, but he's a songwriter, and he talks about the importance of routine. And he says, you need a window in the room, to break up the wall, and everything the same in the same place every time.
Right.
And and I find that about 80% of that I fell into naturally.
Right. Yeah, the rituals. I mean, I like the rituals too. And some people have elaborate rituals and stuff, and then other people are just. We've had writers on early. Well, cup of coffee in the morning, and that's
At the
it.
kitchen table, or maybe I'll
Right.
go out in the
Yeah.
backyard and sit on the bench.
Yeah. And then
Yeah,
other ones will have a 30-minute elaborate, meditation or something before, something. So it's always
yeah.
interesting how people like to approach it here. Yeah. Uh, Another question we always ask writers that come on here, and we don't need any numbers or anything like that, but how do you make a living? Do you make any money off the literature?
And I don't think most people do.
Right. It's a bad business.
Van Gogh made no money off of his, Monet come from a wealthy family, didn't need to make any money.
Right.
I,
There's a lot
I
of
think,
writers up until the mid 20th century too. Yeah.
Faulkner didn't make no money for many, many, many years until he was rediscovered in the 40s.
And then got his screenwriting gigs. Yeah, that's really what
Yeah.
made him his
Well,
monster. Yeah.
Raymond Chandler made a living mostly off of screenwriting.
Right.
People don't realize how many strangers on a train, in different movies he wrote, Double
Yeah.
Indemnity.
Yeah.
And so uh, I'm fortunate that when I sold my businesses,
Right.
multi-million-dollar business and stuff, I don't need to earn a living, so I can be
Right.
very independent.
You already earned the living. Yeah,
Yeah, I've
exactly.
already earned a living. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
Right.
uh, but book sales I think are important, even because as a writer, you want the feedback. You want a lot of readers to read your work.
Hmm.
I would love to have one of my books sell 10,000 copies because I know that there's 10,000 people out there that read this book and
What
maybe got something out of it.
what would you say they do on average for that you see in terms of like, the average kind of sales for one of your books?
Well, I don't know, anywhere from 100 books to maybe 200 or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's the average. That is, I remember when Penguin Random House and the Simon Schuster merger got shut down. Well, during that kind of lawsuit, all of the numbers were brought out, and they said most authors are selling less than 250 copies per book, and that
Yeah,
is with
no,
all the money, all the marketing,
yeah,
all of the
yeah, no,
push behind it. Like it's
yeah,
still like, yeah,
that's the myth that
right, yeah,
they want to tout that big, so you keep writing because
right,
to feed their industry. But yeah, there was a writer. I was at a book signing in LA. author's book signing, and or book, whatever it was. It was like it was there for a week. But this lady was giving a seminar right across from where I had a booth signing books, and so everybody was there because she's a best-selling author, and she goes, "Yes, I'm a best-selling author. 25 years ago, my book sold. What did it sell? I don't know. It was phenomenal. Like I made $40,000 off the book sale.
Right.
Your number one selling book." She says, "But that gave me an opening to give talks and to speak and to
Right.
speak to you people for a fee." And she goes through this whole litany of stuff
And teach
she earns
courses.
her
Yeah.
living off the fringes of that one
Right.
successful book sale.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's about how it runs, I think, for most people,
And then that famous Orson Welles quote, it's towards the end of his life when he's
Yeah.
kind of big and fat, and he has that, that famous interview where he's wearing like that bathrobe and he's smoking a cigar, and
Yeah.
they're like, "Don't you wish you had another hit besides Citizen Kane or something?" And he kind of just scoffs. He's like, he had the cigar in his mouth. He's like, "You only need one." He's like, "You only need one and major hit." Like, he's like, "What? Do I wish I had another one? Sure, but you only need one."
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
"I don't need to do two or three." He's like, "I got one masterpiece, and that made my whole career."
Yeah. Leon Russell said the same thing about,
Yeah,
you know, uh, his song. He just said, "Hey, and he had more than one, but he says, every writer longs for one,
right. And
If
it is
not,
kind of like a bridge, like a stepping stone. Yeah, you can use it as I've heard other people, maybe it's cynical, but I've heard other people that have done kind of a more present last 20 years self-publishing route where they've said, a book is not what it used to be. A book is a business card where they said like the book is not going to make you money, but the book is like you can hold it up and say, look at this. This is a business card. You want me to come speak? You want me to teach this course? You want me to lecture, whatever it is, like this is the business card now, and you can do it that way, and you can do it yourself through KDP or another kind of company that does that. Like it's very
yeah, no, I tell people that ask about writing, I say, well, you should write. You should write every day because there's no feeling like when the open a door and the mailman hands you that first published book in your
right,
hand, and you think, wow. I says the only second greater feeling is when you win a major award and you
right,
walk across that street, and it's like I've achieved what I've wanted,
right,
and because there's nothing else. I mean, movies and that's you start chasing the money, you're going to have a really upsetting life.
right.
I liken it to selling my children away for money. And I mean,
Right.
I give birth to this thing, and I spent 9 months writing it, and then I'm going to sell it to somebody to abuse it. No, I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah.
I don't think so. So, so yeah, so it's pretty funny. Yeah.
And the final question we always like to ask writers: what are you working on now? What's taking up your creative energy, your time? What are you doing?
Well, I'm writing, like I said, I'm in the 10th book in the series, and I'm at about almost 30,000 words into it. And well, when I get back to Italy, I'll get real serious about finishing it maybe before August or September. And it's typical. Warren Steelgrave finds himself.
Oop, you cut out there for a minute, Gary. Sorry. I think it cut you out again there. I'm not getting any audio there. Sorry about that. Try that thing again with that little arrow there. Sometimes it does this where it'll auto correct in the middle of it to change the microphone
How's
or
that?
yeah, you gotcha. Yeah.
Now
So
I don't hear you.
oh, okay. So select microphone and then select
Let me go
speaker.
back. Let me try this one again.
So there's two, it'll say select microphone at the
Oh,
top.
I know. Oh, I hear you there.
Yeah, I hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No. I hit the wrong
It's
button.
it's the perils of podcasting. Like I said, there's always something you got to just work through. We're all doing it on our own here. Yeah, no audio
Yeah.
engineer on the back end,
And
but
so throughout the series, he's like I say, every year I've written a book every year, and every year he's getting older and older and older. So
right,
that's at some point here. But the last I was on this podcast, and the girl, the host had written two of my books. And she says, "No, no, no, you can't stop writing. We just love this character. You can't stop writing this." I says, "Well, he's not going to be very active in a wheelchair." So it's funny.
yeah, it's interesting. I had a guest on. We did a Tom Clancy book, and we were talking about that, about when he you get done with it, right? You're writing a recurring character. You can get bored as a creative. You can say, "Oh, I'm done with this character," or like you said, you've reached this point where you've been working with this character. We've watched him age over, 30, 40 years, whatever it is. And now it's time to put it to bed and start a different character or a new thing. Like it kind of, I don't know. I mean, as a creative, you can feel trapped. Like I think we did a book, we did the first John Clark novel with Tom Clancy, which was like a breakaway from his Jack Ryan stuff in the early 90s there. And we were just talking about, do you think Clancy was kind of like, I don't have it in me to write another Jack Ryan novel right now. I want to do something different. So I invented this John Clark character to do something different. He's a different type of character, thinks differently, is a little more violent, is a little more on edge, ex-Vietnam guy kind of. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Do you feel any of that as you approach this, or
No, absolutely. After my seventh
right?
novel in the series, everyone said, "No, you got to do." I said, "No, I'm getting away from it. I got to do something else." And they said, "No." And that's when I had the bright idea. I was going to sit down and do a book of short stories.
Right.
I had no clue how hard that was going to be.
Right.
8 short stories in a row, changing characters, changing genre, changing place, changing themes. One's
Short
a
stories
murder
are
mystery, one's a murder mystery, and the next one's a love story, the next one is a murder. It's like that was, because every other week you're changing gears. Story
short
might be
stories
only
are
5,000 words, the one
right.
might be only 1,200 words. And,
There's
very
obviously there's overlap, obviously. And I came out of academia, MFA, where the workshops and stuff, they're not really set up for full novels. You can do full novels, but you have to kind of prepare, give everybody plenty of time to read it and stuff, and turn it in early for the workshop to be able to read your novel and give you serious feedback. Usually it's short stories because, one, it's just more conducive to that format of getting immediate feedback, but also short stories are harder. Like they I remember the writer Nick Pizzolatto. He's most famous for doing True Detective, that TV series, but he was in academia before that, and he wrote a few novels and stuff before he went to screenwriting and did that kind of stuff. And he always says, a novel or a short story can be perfect, like a movie can be perfect. Whereas novels are too long form, where you can have you can get away with little blemishes and little hiccups or little boring parts here and there because it's so big that you have room for it. But a short story, a movie, a 90-minute runtime, or a short story, I always think of like Edgar Allan Poe's, the one they make you read in middle school, Telltale Heart. It's like 3 pages, it's like 3 pages, and it's great. It's great. And like it's just like to fit that all in to you're restricting yourself to this. It's so much more challenging
well,
to
having
fit a
having done
complete beginning, middle, and end into a coherent story. Like it's
having done both. Like I say, the first novel I wrote, the first one, wanted to see if I had a voice. It was only 50,000 words. Something. It was a lot of people consider it a novella, but
right,
a novella would be 30,000 words, so it's a little bit more than that. But so they each have their. I haven't done that, short stories and novels. It's and talked to a lot of other writers. The problem a lot of writers have with novels compared to a short story, they can't see the whole theme.
right.
They can, and they can't see the beginning to the end. And I think that's one reason they write a lot of short stories. And the challenge of a novel is to get to 60,000 words, you almost have to have three plots.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I said, now I'm at 30,000 words. And now Jack is turned up. Okay. And so the first plot is of the book is starting to wind down, and now Jack's there. And so it has to take a different direction without leaving that theme to run throughout the book. So all of a sudden now there's got to be this other plot will start to take off, but at the same time, you don't lose the first plot. It's kind
Right.
of, so you got to weave like almost two together.
Right.
I mean, 25,000 words is great length, I believe, for a great story.
Right.
You start getting three times that, in you got to be careful with how the plots are intertwining, because you're not going to do it with one plot.
Right.
If not, it's just so much window dressing that people are going to get bored. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're
Yeah.
using
Yeah.
tons of words you're using a page to describe the inside of a room, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
I have
I
that
knew,
problem with a lot of fantasy novels. You know, when you're reading,
yeah,
I think that's what bogs it down is that people get, George R. R. Martin, the Game of Thrones novels, probably the most famous fantasy series besides Lord of the Rings now. When you read those books, there's maybe like the description of the feast on the table goes on for like 4 or 5 pages. And you're
yeah,
just like,
no,
oh my God, how many
yeah.
ways can you describe this ham hock? Like how many, how
So
many ways can you say this?
so to keep it piffy and keep it on point and
Right.
everything, so you end up with at least two plots that intertwine, and so novels are t difficult in that way. Short stories, like I said, it's difficult. You can't make a mistake. You can't have a blemish
Right.
here or there. It's going to stand out very, very badly. So they're each the same. I'm always amazed at like Shelby Foote or somebody who would outline the whole novel before he starts to write. Huh?
Yeah.
I could never do that. I've been asked, how we never can tell where your book is going. I think, and I'm laughing to myself because I'm thinking, well, as the author, I don't know where it's going. Every
Right.
time I sit down, I think it's going to do something, and my characters rebel, and they're going to go do something else. And so I never think past the next chapter,
Right.
and so. Yeah, I couldn't sit down and I don't know where this book I'm writing is, where it's going to go. I don't know if he's going to live. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know where it goes from here.
And
But
Shelby Foote is one where he's brought up a lot recently. There's been a couple guests in a row that have brought up Shelby Foote, and I wonder, he is an icon in the kind of American literary scene, but I wonder if it's more he represents this kind of old world. He represents the kind of pre-internet world of writing and fiction, and
absolutely.
even his nonfiction. His most famous, the big Civil War narrative,
Yeah.
probably his most famous. And
20
listen,
years.
right,
20 years.
yeah, yeah,
20 years.
and it reads like a novel. Like it reads so well, like when you read it, and it's thousands and thousands of pages, and it gives you such an intricate, I don't know, but yeah, he's just this kind of figure now. And maybe it's part of his kind of caricature, the
Well,
Mississippi accent, the pipe
no,
smoking kind of.
and to hear him talk about
Right.
writing history, he gets upset and they call him a historian. He says, "No, I'm a
Right.
novelist that
Right.
tells a story, history." And the reason history is so boring is because that's how it's been written in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do a chapter on my favorite one is, he says, you do a chapter on Robert E. Lee, and
Right.
his background, blah 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 blah, blah, and it's so dry when he met his wife and everything. Where in his book, I think it was Antietam or one of those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
He's standing on the hill looking down at the small church, and he looks over at his general and says, "That's where I met my wife, and that's where we were married." You find
Right.
out about his marriage and stuff as a story, not
Right.
5 chapters back where it doesn't mean anything. So
And you're flipping back and forth when you read that the Civil War narrative, listeners. It's like you're flipping back and forth. So he gives you what's happening on the Union lines and the government, and then it flips to the Confederate lines and their government, and then it flips back to the Union. So it's kind of this, and he's giving you quotes from the letters, the correspondences that we have records of, people communicating back and forth about moving equipment or whatever it is, moving soldiers, putting in rail lines, whatever they had to do. And you're kind of flipping back and forth, and these guys are almost talking to one another. Like it really does create like just a more intense, like enticing kind of traditional narrative than reading a stuffy textbook where like, and then he said, quote, blah, blah, blah. Like it just kind of dresses it up a little, makes it more exciting, and makes it feel more real. You kind of feel. And this is what he always gets criticized for now, is that, he was too sympathetic to kind of the Southern soldiers in that. And I'm like, what did you want him to do? Like, like he's just giving you quotes from their letters, like their correspondence.
He's sympathetic to them.
Right.
They were dying also.
Right. Like because
they
he
were shooting their
humanized
brother
them.
in a lot of cases,
right. Because he
had family on both sides of that war.
He made them just normal people, which I think people forget about, is that they were just normal people that, a lot of them probably didn't even have that strong convictions, like they were just fighting because they were drafted in or forced to, or whatever it was. Like,
think of Vietnam.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't have a choice, like they were literally, that we're talking about novels, Cold Mountain, a big part of that book and movie, if listeners should go read or watch that if you haven't. And it's like, they were sending officials through these small towns all throughout the South, rounding up soldiers because they didn't have enough. So if you were a guy above the age of 13 or even younger, they were getting a gun in your hand and they said, you need to go to the front lines and you're going to die. Like, and if you didn't, they would come into your house and they would take things. They would put your family under arrest. They would, like, as if you had a choice, like as if these people were just doing it out of their own free will, which some of them probably were, but like most of them weren't,
no, absolutely. And absolutely. I guess you must be pretty elitist to be able to judge people 200 years ago, and like that.
Right.
Now they're saying how Jefferson, well, he owned slaves. Well, something, if you read, he really didn't want to own slaves, but
Jefferson's one,
because at the time there was no way to get quite out of this thing. They were trying to figure that out as they went, but he deeply did not believe in that.
Yeah, I got into some trouble recently because, a few years ago when this was happening, the kind of the hysteria that swept the nation where we're removing statues of Jefferson and stuff. And I was one that said, we shouldn't be removing these statues. And everyone's like, oh, well, he owned slave. And I'm like, yeah, that's not why we built a statue to him, though. Like, we didn't build the statue because he was a slave owner. That actually had so little to do with why we built this statue that
or would he
irrelevant.
Would he truly believed? I mean, you can't take people out of their time.
And I love Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, and he did that biography of Jefferson. And, he makes this point. Everybody forgets it now, but he said, if you read his writings, if you read his stuff towards the end of his life, and of course, Benjamin Franklin, the same thing. A lot of these founding fathers, of course, when they were starting the country, they weren't thinking about this as hard. But then when they got, they were getting, the country was formed and they're aging and they're leading this nation, they started to kind of, this was the beginning of the abolitionist movement. Like, it actually did start with these intellectuals, founding fathers. You read his stuff later in life when he's dying and, Sally Hemings is by his side. Like, he starts to see, he's not perfect. He's definitely not where we are now. Obviously, he was living in the 1800s here. But like, he started to see, they were his children. Like, he raped his slaves. Okay, we know that. But like, he was looking at these young kids that had his face. Like, if that doesn't get you to start rethinking, like, the slave thing, then you can see it. Like, you can see in his writing, he loved Sally. He loved her. He gave her all of his writing to read. He wanted her opinion on it. Like, it's not so simple. It's not so easy to just say.
You got to be quite an elitist to take a side. And, I mean, I told a guy once, I said, of
course, this is all going to get us in trouble, Gary, saying this,
I know. Oh, good. It wasn't as simple as they try to say,
Right. It's much easier to badmouth it now, like Shelby Foote's work on the Civil War and all that. It's much easier to look back and say, oh, look at how wrong that was. And I'm like, well, actually, if you get into the details, much more complicated than you think. Like, it was much more, and not that, we're arguing for anything like that. Of course, listeners will accuse us of that, but it's still like, yeah, you're not seeing the full picture here of the, yeah, it's just, all of that happened. And I'm like, and I think that's so important. The stories we tell ourselves, even if
Mhm.
they're not true, like, most of the stories, the cherry tree with George Washington, or, whatever it is, like, they're not technically true story. They're myths. They're American myths that we created, and they bind us together. Like, the fact that everybody believes
Absolutely.
these things, even if they're not true, they're our myth. It's our
Yeah.
mythology, the American mythology.
Absolutely.
And if we start bashing this, we start tearing it down, I don't think everyone's understanding the long-term consequences of that, the second, third order effects of,
They do,
yeah, or they
19,
want
19
that. Yeah, they
in
want the chaos. Right.
1984, he talks
Right.
about
Yeah.
that's the first thing that's got to go, right?
Right.
Is
Yeah.
history. It's the first thing you got to get rid of
Yeah.
because it binds people together. So you're absolutely right. But I told a guy once, some years back, these two guys were arguing over, I forget what politician it was, and it was they were arguing over whether he was in the service or not. And it would have to do mostly
Was it
around.
the JD Vance thing during the election
No,
last
no, no, no,
cycle,
no.
or
This I'm talking a lot further back.
was this the
But
Clinton or the Bush?
well, it was around that era somewhere. And I
I
just
know
said, hey,
Bush. There was a controversy during the
yeah,
Bush cycle where
but it was
he wasn't
whether,
really in the Air Force. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
no, they just put him in a multi-billion dollar, let him fly over people. Now it was whether or not something to do with the military, whatever the discussion was. And I looked at them both and I just said, either you in the military, either you put on the uniform.
Right. Yeah.
They go, no. I said, then shut up.
Right.
The only people that allowed in that discussion, in my opinion, are those that were in the military. If you're in the
Right.
military, that's your card to argue whatever point you want. I'm for it. I'm against it. He didn't do service. He should have done. Yeah, but if you haven't been in the military,
Right.
don't do it. If you haven't lived in 1700s, don't be talking about slavery and
And
shit.
that was
On
that big
Jefferson.
thing. That was the big thing too during the kind of the war on terror. When Guantanamo Bay controversy was happening during the Bush era, and everyone, that was the big controversy, is, okay, when your commanding officer tells you to do something, even if it's, pee on this prisoner, and you don't do it, you refuse, like, there are serious consequences. And you've never been in that situation where, if you've never been in a situation where, if you don't do even this unethical thing that you're being commanded to do, they can literally hold you in a court martial. They can dishonorably discharge you. Like, it's your hands are tied. Like, it's not like you would, everybody does this with too. Everybody wants to pretend that they'd hide Anne Frank in their attic. Well, when you have somebody with a machine gun in your face, literally about to kill you, it's a much different story. We like to think of ourselves that we would be this, but oh, how could all these people rat on their neighbors? It's because they had machine guns in their face that were like, you're going to die unless you tell me. Like, or even if you do, we're going to kill you anyway. Like, they're,
Yeah, in the book I'm writing now, the woman that's on the run, I mean, she's a top prosecutor and hard nosed and putting people away in jail and for murder and stuff. In her world, everything's black or white. Well, she's in the run now for her life, and people
right.
trying to kill her, and she teams up with my protagonist, and he's a cousin, and so he's helping her get to the grand jury. She's got these files that she's got. If she gets them to the grand jury, she's probably not going to get murdered. Anyway, they get kidnapped, taken out the barn, and these two guys are just about to shoot them both dead. Right? They pull out their guns to shoot them when all of a sudden they drop. A guy has stepped out of the shadows and shot both of those guys. Gives my protagonist keys to the car, and she's on the ground throwing up. And it stuns her because her whole world was black and white at one point. Now,
Right.
for 2 chapters, she's trying to sort this out in her life because she says, we got to call the police. And he goes, you want to die? Are you crazy? This guy just saved your life and you're going to put him in jail?
Right.
And now all of a sudden she's in this gray world and she's trying to deal with that for herself. These are people that she took joy in putting them away for life. And now she's
And thinking
realizing
she was doing
that
the right thing the whole time. Yeah,
now
yeah,
she's realizing there might be another side to that coin.
right.
I've heard a lot of mafia hitmen say,
That's
I killed a lot of people, but I never killed anybody that wasn't worth killing, that didn't deserve it. They were,
right. There was like an honor code amongst those old kind of
yeah,
mafia guys. Yeah,
you didn't
yeah.
kill children, you didn't kill this person, you didn't kill
Right,
innocents, but
right,
when you joined the life, you knew you're going to maybe be killed or have to kill somebody. You made
right.
that choice.
And I mean, that's drama, Garrett. Like that's what you're just describing. Like when even as the conversation with Jefferson, all that, like these complex nuance,
Yeah,
that is what drives drama and storytelling and stuff like this.
I agree.
The
That's
black
why
and
it's a
white, it's easy. It's like,
That's
okay,
yeah, that's why
well
it's in my
then,
book, It's
yeah,
like the first book when he falls in love with a married woman, and
right,
like 3 years later when she's divorced and they're getting together and her singing career is taken off. And he's always been the great novelist, and she's been, and now all of a sudden he's got to deal with her career taking off, and take the back seat,
right,
titled Living a Life, together separately. How do
yeah.
you manage that? And it's the underlying theme of the story,
And even like,
the third book was serial killer. Serial killer comes to town where there is a serial killer, you know. And
and even something like a judge, like as a career, like I know people don't think about it. Obviously, majority of your job is, whatever, like kind of traffic court or whatever, depending on what you do, like where it's very black and white. Okay, these are the rules. You broke the rules. Here's the punishment. But then, like, actually, what your bigger responsibility in that role as a judge in this country is to have this kind of nuance when the law isn't so black and white. Like that's actually the most important part of your job is
yeah,
to when it's not so simple. And our entire legal system is set up this way: third degree murder, first degree murder, second
mhm,
degree murder. It's all about, what was your intention? Did you mean to kill this
yeah,
person? Was it an accident? How did it happen? All of that matters. Like it's so much. And that's the drama of courtrooms, that's the drama of fiction, the drama of life,
yeah.
like,
No,
yeah, like,
absolutely. If you want, I can give you a
please, yeah, please.
quick true story.
Here we go. Yeah.
Okay, after I sold my business, I'm going and I'm starting to write and stuff. My attorney of 40 years, they're doing this large case in federal court, and and well, I guess it was. Yeah, it was federal court. And they asked me to come back and interview witnesses and help pick a jury because, like I told you before, I had this long life of writing classic. So it's first day, and our client is and the attorney are upset because they couldn't get a judge. So they had to get a judge from criminal court to come in to sit on this, and he's never been on a civil court, let alone one this big. And so they're saying, maybe we should just ask for a bench trial. And I'm sitting there laughing. And they said, so what's so funny? I says, well, if you want my opinion, I'd go with the judge. And they go, I says, I have won in federal court, and the law specifically said I get my attorney's fees. Judge didn't think it was fair. Right?
Right.
I says, we've got this black judge they brought out of retirement. They've been putting people away for life. If you win this trial, he's not going to have no problem taking their money. He's put people away for life.
Right.
But it's that same kind of thing, He's like, what, these two German idiots ripped you out of $2 million? What the hell's that? Take the money.
Yeah.
And so they decided to go take their chance with the judge, and yeah, he didn't cut those guys no slack,
Right.
because
That's, I have one of my, great uncle on my father's side. He was a judge where I grew up in Baltimore, and he had a lot of respect from law enforcement. Got me out of a couple traffic tickets, honestly, and jury duty in my life. I've met the man once in my life, and he's very old now. I think he might have recently just passed. That's, again, literally, I had very little contact with this guy. Just shared a name and I guess shared relative in this stuff. But the reason he was so respected, because he did a lot of traffic court, as a judge in the Baltimore there. And he would throw the book at people, where he would just be like, oh, you did this. He's like, well, here's your community service for, your traffic violation or whatever. And that made a lot of law enforcement really respect him, because he respected the law on the book. Like he wasn't going to cut you slack. He wasn't going to be like, oh, well, you're young and dumb. He's like, no, like, you broke the law, kid. Like, what are you talking about? This is the punishment for breaking the law. Hopefully you won't do it again, and you'll be like a great member of society. And it's just crazy how that is actually lasted down to me, like a third generation removed from that. And it wasn't even like I was seeing him all the time either, as the other part of the family. And it's still like rippled down to me, like a judge that was doing the right thing, like taking the job seriously, issuing the judgment on complex issues that required it, kind of thing. And it trickled down generations. I mean, this, I love romanticism. I love to romanticize things like that. And I think that is so important to, did he know that, 30 years later, one of his great nephews or whatever, was going to get out of a traffic ticket because they saw your last name on your driver's license or whatever. Like, are you related to him? And I said, yes. Like, okay, drive safe. Like, I was like, okay, like, thank you, And again, did he know that? No, but like, that's a consequence of somebody doing the right thing. And I don't know. I like to romanticize that kind of stuff, but I've kept you long enough, Gary. This has been fantastic. Where can people find you? Give websites, social media handles, all of that stuff. And this will all be linked below as well, listeners. It's down there. Go click on it.
Okay. They can find me if they want any more. All my podcast articles I've written and all my books are on my website, www.garysmithauthor.com. And I'm also offering a free audiobook download of my latest book is there. If they go there, they just have to download it. They got to put in, I guess, their where to download it to, but that's it.
Social media, anything like that? Are you on social media or?
I've gotten off most of it. You know what I mean? I'm trying to think of what my X handle is, and I think it's Gary_author.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll find you on there too if it isn't. I usually do a pretty thorough search, and try to, when I publish it, I tag everything and all that.
Yeah,
so,
very good. Appreciate it.
All right, yeah, appreciate it too. I'm gonna.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored,
Some activities are intentional, right?
it shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Bored. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavybored. That's right, Heavy Bored is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, jerk shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.